Have you heard what's happening at a small liberal arts college, a private college in St. Paul, Minnesota? Yep, Hamlin University is in the news nationwide, and the debate is raging about academic freedom and religious tolerance and inclusion and what it means for adjuncts and their role in higher education today. So here are the details. At an 1,800 student college known as Hamlin University in St. Paul, Minnesota, an adjunct instructor of an art history class displayed a painting of the Prophet Muhammed. A student objected, and the adjunct was shown the door. There's a lot more to this story, though, and a lot more that we can learn about higher education and our work in higher education today, and especially what it means for adjuncts. Adjuncts that are more than 50% of most faculties at colleges and universities today, that teach almost 70% of all the courses offered today. But there's a lot more to the story than just the kerfuffle about religious tolerance and academic freedom. There's something important happening in higher education that impacts adjuncts and the future of higher education. Adjuncts that are more than 50% of most college and university teaching faculty, and adjuncts that teach almost 70% of all the courses taught today. Yes, so if you do something wrong as an adjunct, you're shown the door. What does that mean for higher education, and what does that mean for your future in higher education? Let's take a closer look. Hi, I'm James Callahan, and this is the Do-Over Show. Yep, I have a Ph.D. and I've spent 20 plus years teaching as an adjunct in 8 or 9 colleges, universities, grad schools, public, private, religious, non-religious. Yes, I've been through it all, and I've talked to hundreds of people just like you who have a role in higher education, who are concerned about higher education, or are filling that difficult position today of being an adjunct and not sure what the future holds. So there's something happening at this little college. I keep calling it a college. It's a university, but it's 1,800 people. Oh, it's really old. It's still a little college. All right, anyway, there's something happening there that can help us understand our role in higher education and your role as an adjunct. The Hamlin University story started back in the last semester in the fall of 22 when a global art history adjunct published a syllabus and then worked through the year and got to October when it was time to show an art depiction of the Prophet Muhammad and Islamic art and its history and its role. And a student enrolled in the course who had seen the syllabus from the beginning, when the time came, objected and wrote a letter to the administration. In response to that letter to the administration, a group came along to support the student, and the university just decided, well, we're not going to invite that adjunct back for a spring class, which was planned. Now, of course, the regional organization that came to back the student held a press conference, and the university wasn't shy about publishing its opinions from the administrators and then from the faculty about what was happening. And that's the first tip-off. You see, when your college or university is willing to go public and to offer public statements, they only do so because they think there's an upside for them. That is, even in defending a position you may disagree with, when they publish it, they're not doing it because they have to. They're doing it because they think they have an advantage in doing so. So here are the details. Dr. Erica Lopez Prater was teaching a global art history class, and the syllabus included a note, a warning, that there would be depictions of religious figures that could be triggering to students, and promised to alert the students just before the actual showing of the paintings, and that's what the adjunct did. A student in the class, a Muslim who is also president of the Muslim Student Association at Hamlin, filed a complaint then with the university administration, and the adjunct spring semester contract was pulled. Now, the first reaction was that the university's response to this violated the moral code of academic freedom, and that an adjunct, even an adjunct in this situation, needs to be protected and defended. Now, the interesting thing is that people said the adjunct was fired, which goes to show that even in higher education, people have no clue at all about the employment status of an adjunct. Adjuncts are not fired. They don't have to be fired. They're at-will employees. They're temporary. They're seasonal. They're contract employees. They're just not offered a contract, even if there is a verbal agreement, an email, a written agreement. It's not a contract until the contract is issued, and contracts for adjuncts are usually issued just the week of or a couple weeks before the actual course is offered. All a university or college has to do is say, no, we're not going to offer that course, or we're not going to offer that course with you teaching it. You're not fired. It just goes away. And that's the tenuous spot that adjuncts find themselves in. Even though they're more than half of the teaching faculty at most colleges and universities, and I'll repeat it, even though they teach almost 70% of all the courses taught, they have absolutely no claims to employment. Zero, none, nada, nunca, zip. Now, CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, came to the students' defense and defended the school's initial response to this. And the Hamlin University president went so far as to say, respect for the observant Muslim students in the classroom should have superseded academic freedom. Oh, a little caveat to this. Now, CARE, the national office, came out to clarify the position of the Minnesota office. And the CARE national office actually defended the adjunct professor. And that just makes the thing even messier because you're not sure who you're listening to or what story is at play and what consequences there are for you in your situation. Now, the first point to be made about this is that there is no such thing as absolute academic freedom, not even for full-time tenured professors, even without post-tenure review. You know, some schools have added post-tenure review to keep tenured professors sort of on the spot for increasing their teaching quality, continuing to publish, and actually improving their pedagogy. That is, even for schools that don't have that post-tenure review, there is no such thing as absolute academic freedom, especially when it comes to the tenuous role of academics in higher education today. You see, that means that it's for us to understand that academic freedom only applies to publicly tenable ideas. That is, the things that are prevailing and will influence, especially a university or college administration, to respond or react, to defend or to accuse, depending on what is currently part of the academic project, the moral project, the utopian project of higher education today. There is no absolute academic freedom. And even though professors, even tenured professors, and even the Association for Academic Freedom, even though they will advocate that academic freedom is something, academic freedom doesn't actually exist. And here's some of the background to the religious studies part of this, and that is that there are Islamic traditions, some, which don't condone and object to the visual depiction of the Prophet Muhammed, actually of any prophet, Moses, Jesus, any prophet within the Islamic tradition. Now, that's not the majority, but it does represent the Muslim student group, and in the Twin Cities, the religious background of the group that has a significant influence in that setting. Not outside that setting, but in that setting, and that's an important caveat to note. Knowing that showing this in this particular context would be a particularly hot button issue, what would you do in that situation if you were going to teach your class in art history and you wanted to make sure that this was treated fairly? Now, here's what the adjunct professor actually said in the course just 2 minutes before showing the image that triggered the objection to the administration from the student. I am showing you this image for a reason. There is common thinking that Islam completely forbids outright any figurative depictions or any depictions of holy personages. While many Islamic cultures do strongly frown on this practice, I would like to remind you that there is no one monothetic Islamic culture. The adjunct thought that they were an arbiter. They were going to be the judge to explain and to correct and criticize certain forms of Islamic culture within the art history setting, within the academic setting of art history. And this happens a lot in higher education, where one discipline opines upon another discipline, especially religion. Whether it's the sciences or STEM opining about religion, we follow the science, which has become the biggest flex to exclude religious motivation or justifications for anything within public health, life. That is, we use our flexes in higher education from our discipline to try to correct the thinking of the uninformed and ignorant in other disciplines. It's common, it's ordinary, it's higher education. Now, the student who filed the complaint said this: I'm 23 years old. I've never seen a picture of the Prophet. Never in my whole life. And there's a tip-off. But it's not about the overly sensitive nature of today's students. That's our default. They're snowflakes. They just can't take anything or criticism or openness. No, there's something bigger going on here, something more important than our complaint against an entire generation. And that brings us to one of the biggest takeaways from this, and that the world of higher education is not the real world. Hasn't been, never has been. The world of higher education is a moral and social project in utopianism, in which there is the application of a skill set, a certain best practices or skills or certification knowledge that's part of it to produce the future. That is, anytime you hear people talking about a life well lived, or influencing the future, or steering the trajectory of a culture or of a nation, and that education is integral to this, anytime you do that, it simply cannot be evaluated. I bet the college or university you work at has some lifelong learning objectives stipulated in their influence on students. What are you going to use to measure that? The betterment of freedom and identity in your country? And who's going to be the arbiter of that? Who's going to actually evaluate? What metric are you going to use? It doesn't exist, and yet we fool ourselves, and that's the utopianism associated with the unreal world of higher education. The sooner we realize this, especially as adjuncts, which are so easily excluded, just, I'm sorry, you're not invited back, without any consequence at all to the university or to the students, only to us as adjuncts. The sooner we realize this, the sooner we'll have a better perspective on what we should be saying and what we're actually running up against or fighting against when we try to make judgments and be arbiters of general knowledge of other fields or of certain discrete pockets of tradition or history or culture or social groups. Now, if you're a teacher and you're saying to yourself, but hey, wait, this is my field. I'm the expert in this. I have the Ph.D. in this. It's my class. It's my syllabus. And this is integral to the presentation of this material in this class. So I should have the ability to do it. Otherwise, I'm violating my academic credentials as an expert in this field. And the student who complained said this: how can a classroom be considered inclusive when the instructor asks, in this case, a Muslim student to leave the class while they engage? Well, the student wasn't asked to leave. The student was said, you may leave if you're going to object to this. The student stayed and objected to it. So obviously there was a disconnect there. I know professors, you will respond and say, how can a class be considered inclusive when it excludes things students are sensitive to? How is that education? How is that increasing our critical thinking capacity? But let's admit something. When we teach our courses, we don't talk about everything we can talk about in that course or even that time period or that subject. We pick and choose. Our fields depict, we don't talk about absolutely every detail. We pick and choose the things that we believe are best representative of the role of this course at this time, and that is that we are selective. And yes, this may be a significant part of art history generally, but the choice to include it was a choice with purpose, knowing, and especially with the statement, knowing that this would create an adversarial circumstance. And that adversarial circumstance was not a concession to general ideas like snowflakes. You might be offended by anything, by the way I breathe. No, this was specifically about a religious group in the Twin Cities area that doesn't like visual depictions. This is an art history class. If you are, you will be offended. I'm still going to do it. So if it really bothers you, don't participate. That is, it was really a confrontational move. And in your field, you're smart enough to know what triggers people. You're smart enough to know what things pick fights. Heck, most of us pick things on purpose, mention things, even offhanded comments that are not included on the syllabus or in the course content, because we want to get a response. We look at the faces of unengaged students staring at their phones or their computers, never looking us in the eye, and we say, I'm at least going to make them mad. That way I get some engagement. You know you do it. I do it all the time. And this is part of our struggle with engagement. Another thing this shows us, that adjuncts, yep, we are expendable. We're the easiest just to uninvite, disinvite, not invite, to pull the contract. We're not fired. We're the easiest just to let go and disappear because there are no consequences for the school, only upside in getting a person who they regard as toxic. By the way, good luck to this adjunct professor in getting another job. They are radioactive. And unless a school wants to make a virtue signal by saying they're going to hire this person in order to prove a point, now the PhD and the expertise of this adjunct no longer matter. Now it's simply how the fight will play out in PR for the virtue signaling of the school that likes or won't hire this adjunct. That is not a life that any of us want to live to. That's a martyrdom. Yeah, you might be a Socrates, but remember, his cocktail hour killed him. And it might lead to martyrdom for us. Well, good luck trying to pay the bills if you're a martyr. Now, the first letter that characterized this from Hamlin University's administration publicly was offered by a person named David Everett, Associate Vice President of Inclusive Excellence. And there's another tip-off right there. And this whole class of other administrators have to justify their salaries. Their high salaries, often higher, always higher than tenured faculty. They have to justify it by being area experts. So no longer are department chairs arbiters of this information, or academic deans or provosts arbiters of this information, but the area expert that the college or university pays a couple $100,000 to in order to know and to run interference in these discrete areas of moral concern in the project of higher education. They have to justify their existence. You think this person is just going to let this go? Not going to write a letter of support? Not going to find a way for a local chapter of CARE to be involved in this? Not to give the student a platform? No, they're going to be in favor of this because it's to an advantage. It's to their advantage in their role and their salary in higher education. Now, I'll give you this. A letter was sent to the school newspaper by the Department Chair of Religious Studies defending the adjunct instructor. So here's one discipline, religious studies, defending an adjunct teaching in art history. And this religious studies professor said that, yes, it's fully justified that this person would teach it, and it's acceptable, and it's part of the academic experience itself. And that was published in the school newspaper, except it was deleted a couple days later by the school newspaper. Oops. And there was a letter signed by the art history faculty in the graduate program of the University of Minnesota, which is where the adjunct received their Ph.D. And this was a strong defense of the adjunct, of the teaching of the course, of the visual depiction chosen, of the approach in the syllabus, the presentation. All of this was justified. They said, "We view her course at Hamlin to uphold the standards and norms of our discipline and its changing global canon. We also admire this adjunct's thoughtful approach to teaching, as demonstrated by, among other things, her clear and sophisticated understanding that historical knowledge always intersects with contemporary circumstances and experiences." They even threw in a little dig when the Professor Emeriti who penned the letter was an Islamic art expert. Yeah, that was a little flex. What they didn't say in the letter is that writing a letter is all that they can do. That's all anyone can do. Tenured faculty, professional experts, that's all anyone can ever do. They can write a letter and they can voice an opinion, but the adjunct is still radioactive. The adjunct is still not teaching a course in the spring of 23. That's all you can do. Write a letter. So what's happening at Hamlin University today is a display of what has been happening and what the current situation is in higher education, the nature of higher education, and especially the role of adjuncts in higher education. So what's your response to something like this? Did you see it coming? Did you see things like this coming? Or have you experienced something like this yourself? Have you been labeled toxic or radioactive because of something you chose to teach in your class? Have you been not invited back to teach at a school, a college or university, because you were just doing your job by teaching your discipline? If that's happened to you, we need to hear about it. And thanks for being part of the Do-Over Show. Please, could you tap the like button? Because it really helps a lowly adjunct like me. And while you're down there, consider subscribing and ringing the notifications bell so you don't miss the next episode. I'm so glad you found me, and I found you. Thanks.